Welcome back. This is the Game Dev Show. I'm Luke Greenaway. This week, I am joined by Feargus Urquhart, the founder of Black Isle, co-founder of Obsidian, legendary studios behind Planescape Torment, Fallout 1, Fallout 2, Fallout New Vegas, Knights of the Old Republic 2, Neverwinter Nights 2, and then more recently, Pillars of Eternity, Outer Worlds. We've even got South Park Stick of Truth in there. Fergus, incredible list of RPGs, accolades. Welcome. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. A little tired. The dogs decided that they needed to bark at nothing at about 5 a.m. this morning. But other than that, doing pretty good.
Good. There's nothing worse when your dogs start kicking off and
and then you go to the window. You go to the window and like, what are you barking at?
What dogs have you got?
We have they're called Tibetan Terriers, which oddly they're not even terriers. They're like little sheepdogs. 30, 35 pounds. They're a lot of fun. They're a little too smart for their own good, but other than that, they're definitely a lot of fun.
Let's dive in, because obviously you've got an exceptional career in the games industry. And what would be great is to actually start before you even started in the industry, doing a bit of stalking. And I saw on your LinkedIn where you mentioned your degrees. You actually say you were almost a Bachelor of Bioengineering at San Diego UC. What happened? Why the almost?
It really all was because, I was super interested in engineering, and I think I was only like 3 classes short from actually getting the degree. It was, and one of them was like a sociology class. It wasn't even an engineering class. It was like one general education thing that I needed to take. No, what happened was I started in 91. I was hired for summer playtesting at Interplay. And so where I got just, it was really my start in the industry, and it was super interesting. And that's kind of when I first started to meet other people in games. One of the first games I tested was actually called RPM Racing, which I think was Silicon and Synapse's first Super Nintendo game, and then Silicon and Synapse then became Blizzard. So it was so that's how I kind of met all of them like super early on. And then I did that for 2 summers, and I was still going to school, and it's about 80, 90 miles from where Interplay was to San Diego. And so for my last quarter there, I was trying to work full-time because I got hired full-time as a producer at Interplay for like my 3rd summer. And I was trying to work full-time and also commute 80, 90 miles to school, which was stupid. So I didn't do very well that quarter. I think I don't know if I passed a single class. Those were my last 3 classes. And I don't know, I just decided after that I was going to pursue games, and my dad was pretty pissed about it. But I think, luckily success came quickly. I'm, a lot of luck, not so much. I worked hard, but it was a great time in the industry to start. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I moved so quickly, and my dad cooled off.
Yeah. Yeah, you look back now. It's crazy, isn't it, that it just wasn't considered like a career, like back then. And
not at all.
I think it's so mad now, because you look at it now, and if you were going to go into any kind of entertainment medium, you would say, well, look, go for a degree in computer science or video game development or graphic design or animation, because it's like such a massive opportunity, video games. Weirdly though, like QA, for example, hasn't really changed, right? You still have, these 0-hour contracts, and you have people who just, I did it at Sega for a couple of years, like 3 months on, a couple of months off, 3 months on. Do you think playtesting is the same opportunity now as it was when you got into it?
I think it's where you do the testing that makes it different. So I think it was different back then. It really was more of a part-time job, and it was mostly college students, and and it was small. And what's weird back then is, as a tester, you had multiple games you were testing rather than there being multiple testers on one game, which was sort of an interesting difference, right? But I think the other difference, and this holds true to today, is that if you are a tester at a developer, that is a very different experience than being a tester at a publisher. A developer, you're more part of the organization. You are embedded with the team. Most of us, Obsidian would hire sort of temp testers from now on, and we were always very upfront, like, hey, this is a 6-month thing. Most of our testers were kind of in test for us as long as they really wanted to be there. And I think the other thing about being a tester and developer is there's just way more opportunity for growth. Brandon Adler, who is the game director on The Outer Worlds 2, he started in test, with us. His head of director of gameplay on it, Matt Singh, was started in test, and then he started being a producer on the DLC for Fallout New Vegas. So I think that's the difference. Interplay at the time was just transitioning to being a publisher, was still mostly a developer. And I think that's more of why it was a different feeling than, how a publisher, just a straight up publisher feels now in test.
So my experience in testing was Sega. And as a publisher, it was a conveyor belt of titles, and like some of the titles we worked on. And it's interesting that the friends that I made there was a group of us who worked on Football Manager as testers. And, 10 years later, we've all been groomsmen for each other at our weddings. And it's like this bond that you build in QA is very, it's very interesting. It's very almost quite surreal. I think it's a closer bond than you form I've ever formed in any other role with any other team. I think you go through crunch together. You go through like the highs and lows of being put on a good title, and then you'll be put on something like Shinobi on the 3DS. And Shinobi's a great game, but playing on the 3DS on the night shift for 8 hours in 3D, like it's not how it was supposed to be played. I don't think.
I had to test Game Boy stuff, like original Game Boy stuff. Wow. And back then, it was there was this Star Trek Game Boy title that I think was done by, I could be wrong, but I think it was done by Visual Concepts for Interplay, and it was so hard. And the thing we always laughed at, because back then when you had to submit to Nintendo to get approval to release the game, you actually had to videotape from start to finish. And it had to be continual videotape. It could not be you could pause it and then redo a level. It had to be a single playthrough. And they would let you, of course, take a tape out and put a tape in. And then you had to actually put in a FedEx thing to Japan, because they had to be approved in Japan. Sometimes it was a long game. Let's say it was 40 hours. That means you had 5 8-hour videotapes. And oh my God, you could see almost grown people crying when someone unplugged the VCR by accident or something happened. Anyway, with the Star Trek Game Boy game, each of the testers that were working on it were sort of an expert in one part of it. And so we would just hand off the Game Boy. But a Game Boy, of course, you can't record on a VHS tape, right? So there was this thing called the Wide Boy, which you basically had this weird, totally janky looking cable thing that plugged into it. Well, actually, it wasn't even plugged in. It was the Game Boy had been taken apart and then it had been soldered into it. And it with the Game Boy on a TV purely for the purpose of being able to videotape it. It was sort of the sticks and stones and fire era, I think.
Oh, bless the Game Boy. The Game Boy got me through my youth, I think. Mario and the 6 golden coins, I remember, as a particular highlight. But so Interplay, you're in Interplay for quite a while, and I feel like this was the foundation of your career, and obviously you did incredible things even just starting there. Interplay itself had incredible highs, but it also had moments of turbulence, for want of a better word. What was it like during both the highs and these moments of volatility?
A lot of what we do and what games are is entertainment, right? And so sometimes entertainment hits right, and sometimes it hits wrong, and sometimes it's a whole lot harder than you think it's going to be. And sometimes, it's never easier. It's just sometimes it's much harder than you think it is. And so I think with Interplay, what was interesting, and I have to give Brian Fargo a whole lot of credit, is he put a lot of trust in a bunch of people who didn't know what the hell they were doing. But that was the industry back then. And people have that negative comment, right? Give people enough rope to hang themselves. We all do that sometimes, but I think it's more of with him, it was just more of he really let us do what we thought was the right thing to do. And that spawned games like Fallout and Torment. He kind of stepped back and we had to explain what we're doing and what was the box and, stuff like that. But he really let us do it. That's awesome. But then when you have a whole lot of people that are in an industry that's super new and things like that, then there can be things where things just really don't go well. And so I think that's what you kind of saw, you saw at Interplay. You had products that could never have existed except at Interplay. And then I think the counterpoint to that was really troubled products that kind of stumbled along for long periods of time. And it kind of they balanced balancing each other. That's the wrong way to say it. But I think that was the challenge, and that led to some of the turbulence. And there were so many inflection points in the industry that we nowadays we forget about, right? The whole thing of going like floppy disks to CDs, right? And that like was super hard on a lot of companies, because suddenly you went from, I'm gonna get my things wrong, but like, what was a 3.5-inch disc was like 1.44 megabytes of data, right? To 700 megabytes, right? So, and how laughingly, we download games that could be 100 gigs, right? So, which is just crazy. But that jump, I think Interplay did a pretty good job of sort of like dealing with that jump. Other companies didn't. But I think it just overall was a super turbulent time, that like sort of like, I don't know, 94, 95 to 2000 period of like, is it PC? Is it console? Is it this? Is it that? And so, I mean, ultimately Interplay weathered it for a long time. And I think, and obviously a lot of incredible games came out. But what I go back to is really that thing of like, if Brian hadn't run Interplay that we did and put the trust in us, then we wouldn't have seen a lot of those awesome games.
Yeah. And there were a lot of awesome games, right? Like, and I think that's the thing that's hard, is when things stopped working, well, certain games didn't come out into play, like obviously see the light of day. It was tough because they were incredible IPs. And one of them was Baldur's Gate. And I love Baldur's Gate, like Baldur's Gate 2, Baldur's Gate 1, and the games that have gone on to like replicate and use that as their, aspiration, I guess, their point of innovation. Did you know at the time when you were working on Baldur's Gate, did you know that you'd end up having this relationship with, D&D RPGs and this influence over the RPG genre as a whole?
No idea. I mean, we were just, I don't know who was talking. We were in this conversation yesterday also about Fallout, right? Of like, just this whole, like when we were working on Fallout, we had no idea that Fallout was going to become like this mega worldwide brand, right? Not at all. I mean, that just wasn't it, right? And you look at Baldur's Gate, I mean, so I'm this like, super nerd in the Tustin High Gaming Club, mocked a little bit or a lot sometimes about, playing D and all this kind of stuff. And you fast forward this, 14-year-old to when he's 26, so 12 years later, and now he's in charge of the exclusive, at that point was an exclusive D&D license to the Forgotten Realms and Planescape. And Ravenloft was in there at some point, but I think dropped out. And so, I don't know, it was so early in the industry that we were just really trying to make awesome games. I mean, a lot of it was really based upon our love and experience with tabletop role-playing games. Like, how could you have that experience? And I think what, also maybe sometimes people don't remember is like that period of time for D&D was not a great time for tabletop D&D. TSR was having a lot of financial problems. That's around the time when they were getting purchased by Wizards of the Coast. I think one of the things I'm super happy about what we were able to contribute to was also, and this is what we got from a lot of people after they played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, was this thank you for making D&D game, because I got to, one, go back and experience something that I love, but two, because, and this was controversial as we were making it, was putting multiplayer in, and it's an interesting multiplayer mode, and it's very divisive, where some people think it's awesome and then a lot of people don't think it's awesome. But for the people that like it, like they had said, hey, I got to get back together with my D&D, friends from college and play through Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question there, I mean, we had no idea. I think that was what was also great about the industry at the time. We were not worried about, is this going to be the next awesome AAA game that is going to be at the top of the Steam charts? And like, we're just, hey, this is a cool game we're making, and hopefully it does awesome, and then we'll go make another one. I mean, it wasn't as flippant as that, but it definitely was. It feels now sometimes the industry, and this is when you let it happen, right? Of where the success is like so much rides on the success of a game that it feels like can be this giant weight on the team and the studio and management and the publisher's shoulders, that it's, I don't know, as stressful or more stressful than it should be, but it just was a different time. And I think that led to us not getting ahead of ourselves and thinking that we were making something for posterity. We were just a bunch of people making a fun D&D game.
You can feel that though, right? Like when you play it, it feels like a D&D campaign. So I just did it. I just played single player. I remember Baldur's Gate 1 being incredibly difficult almost immediately. Baldur's Gate 2, I remember being a bit softer on the difficulty level, but what made it incredible when you were playing it, even like I played it on my own, was you would meet other parties who were trying to do the same thing as you, like, you know, NPC-led parties. And it was like they're trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And that felt incredible because you don't actually get that within D&D, like the tabletop. It's, you know, it's, you have your DM and then you have your party of say 4 or 5 of you. And even though that's complete chaos 9 times out of 10, you don't have another party doing tabletop next to you playing the same campaign. And I think that was one of the best things about Baldur's Gate was when, and I'm surprised more games haven't done that, where you actually feel like you're part of something much bigger because actually there's NPCs doing what you're doing, and you're going to have to, you know, meet them at some point. Yeah, I love Baldur's Gate. It's so good. So like,
I know. I mean, like Baldur's Gate 2, I remember because like I mean, I have to admit, I didn't finish Baldur's Gate 2, but I think my game clocked in right before, like right around when we shipped, 150, 160 hours just into that like single playthrough that I had at the time. You know, I think Ray had even one that was like 200 hours or something like that. Just, I mean, insane. I mean, it is just crazy that this, you know, that game was not made by a lot of people and it was made in about 18 months. And it was because I think a lot of it was just the focus on, I mean, what matters in a role-playing game is content. It's just that content and the quests and the people you get to talk to, and obviously the loot and spells and things like that as well. But it just, I mean, I think BioWare just did an incredible job optimizing. I mean, that sounds so scientific, but, you know, optimizing how they were going to work on it. And they said, you know what, this is what people love. People love the RPG content, and that's where we're going to take, I'm exaggerating here, but 97% of the team, and they're just going to work on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can feel that. You know, when you play, you can feel it. You did leave Interplay. You founded Black Isle. How did that come about? So, because that's a big thing to do, like, because that was quite early on in your career still, wasn't it? What was it that led you to doing that?
You know, I think it was a number of things. You know, in the 90s, like when you got into games, there was almost just this, well, you're eventually going to start your own studio. Like it was just everyone just thought that. It was because it was just not it was the price of failure were just, in some ways it was easier to succeed and the price of failure wasn't as high. And so it just wasn't a scary thing. And on top of it, even though I was 33 when we started Obsidian, we were all in our 20s. So, I mean, you're pretty indestructible in your 20s, right? And so you're like, and you don't necessarily have, you know, a significant other, a partner, you don't have kids, you don't have a house, a mortgage. And so it's that time. And so that's the time in the industry where we developed. And so it was just always this thing. And so we always had this idea that we were going to start a studio. And then when Black Isle came around, then definitely was a group of people that we all liked making games of a certain type. And we talked, you know, and so then, you know, I mean, it got to a point at some points where we talked about it. I mean, we actually didn't ever talk about it a lot. It was just more, to be honest, it was really more of an understood thing. You know, and I don't want to be negative towards Interplay, but it got hard, you know, at Interplay. There wasn't a lot of money. It was hard to get computers. Interplay was having a crisis of who they were and what they were doing. And it didn't feel like Black Isle was part of the future that they wanted for the company. And so when you're in charge of the thing where it doesn't feel like that's really where they feel the company is going, then it's like, okay, well, I want to still do what I am doing. Like I want to manage these type of games and I want to go do that. And so if the future isn't here, then, you know, let's try it somewhere else.
Obviously, I think a lot of people out there are grateful that you did do that, like, because it's very easy to stay where you are, right? Like it's very easy to be like, I'm not happy with this, but I've got this security. And I do think you're right, though. I think it's like it'd be a lot harder to do that now because like the industry it's not oversaturated, but it's very, very competitive. Like, you know, starting out in indie dev. I've got to ask you this because this has come up on quite a few episodes. Obviously, when we chat to our guests, they talk about our favorite game. Obviously, this is why this is a bit of like a fanboy moment for me, but mine's Planescape Torment.
Oh, cool.
Probably the only game, and well, definitely the first game I can remember sitting there playing on like a Pentium 2 or something like really, really old and ancient, and playing by like this window in the room and looking out, and it was like 7 p.m. so like the sunset, etc., and playing it all the way through the night until the sun started rising. And I remember just this moment, I've just been so content, like so genuinely happy. And I was out of the mortuary, and like obviously I'd spoken to Moore a lot, and it was just amazing. It was such an incredible game. And when you talk, like when people have played it, it's weird because often it comes up and everyone's like, yeah, that's my favorite game. That's my favorite game. From a narrative perspective, from like a questline, etc. I could obviously just go on and on with various superlatives. What was your involvement in Planescape Torment?
It's interesting. It was at a very high level and then at a very low level. And what I mean by that, and so before I say anything, I have to give like an immense amount of credit to Chris Avallone, because he was really the kind of the powerhouse behind that. Tim Donnelly, who was the lead artist, and also Aaron Myers, and Aaron Campanella was one of the artists. He ended up doing like some alternate posters and stuff. And Dan Spitzley was lead programmer. And what I did early on was say, we had a lot of Planescape. When I took over Black Isle, what would become Black Isle, there was a lot of Planescape games being made. It took a while, but we eventually then collapsed them all into Planescape Torment. And so really what I first did is I just said, hey, let's make a Planescape game using the Baldur's Gate engine. We don't want, like, let's really use the engine. Let's not go and say, okay, we're going to use the engine, but then we're going to go make it 3D. And no. We're just going to really use the engine for what it is and just focus on content. But like, what can we do that actually makes it feel different? And that's where Chris, so we kind of, at that point, it became more of a joint conversation. This was a long time ago, but it was more of where like, well, what we could do, the characters in Baldur's Gate were fairly small, a little bit more focused on the combat. And so in this, we were like, well, what we could do is focus more, move the camera in and focus more, like really focus on the characters and make these companions like much more unique. And then, kind of focus on some other things, make, sort of bigger screen animations, and then figure out how to make Sigil really feel like a metropolis of demons and devils and and all that other kind of stuff. So that was really, so setting the box was really, and then I said, and it's Planescape, so you have to go to 3 different planes. I said, like, let's not just make it in Sigil, let's make it about Planescape. And it's escaping me. I had one of the things that I said, use the BG engine, goes to 3 door, goes 3, I forgot. There was one other thing that I said was a part of the box that's not coming to me. And so that was at the high level when the project started. At the low level, what I did towards the end is it's one of the games I worked on where I played a ton. I finished it 3 or 4 times before the game came out, and I played as different classes. And then what I did is, the game was never meant to focus on combat. But what I did is I really did at least work with the team on, we need to make the combat a little bit better than it was, and so there were certain areas that were a little bit more combat heavy. And so we just I helped work with them to kind of tweak those areas. And then the last thing I did is I worked on the leveling, the progress of leveling, like handing out of experience points. And I just came up for a system for Chris Avallone to say, okay, well, just give out experience points at these levels for these quests, blah, 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 blah. And then that is what created the progression for the game. So that's kind of what, weirdly, that was my talk very high level. And then I was at the very low level as we were finishing up, just to help, round it out.
Yeah, it's just an incredible game. But you did touch on it just then, like working at the high level and obviously working at the same time, like almost like a qualitative tester, like providing that feedback. The longer you were at Black Isle, the more and more you obviously focused on the PR, on the marketing side. Did you miss the development side? Did you miss being more focused on that? Or was it just your role had naturally evolved as the studio got greater and greater notoriety?
Yeah, I think the thing, I don't know, I've explained it, I don't know, I've talked about it in kind of different ways, is, I was the penguin that was pushed forward into the ocean, right, to deal with to deal with all the killer whales. No, I'm not going to make that analogy go any further, but I was the person that was in charge, right? And so I needed to do the things that needed to be done that only someone in my position could do. That sounds really bland, but it did mean ultimately, as Black Isle got bigger, and even as Obsidian has gotten larger over the years, more and more my job does become contract negotiations and medical, like figuring out how we're going to pay for our medical, and budgeting, all those things, right? And so, and I'm not bad at it. I don't think I'm necessarily amazing at it, but I'm pretty good at it. And I've been doing it for so many years, so I have a lot of experience. So it sort of lends to it, and it's still rewarding. I'm not saying it's not. It's annoying sometimes, but it is that sense. I've helped Black Isle and Obsidian be successful in the things that I've done. When it comes to development, I got into the industry to make games, right? That's actually that sounds too definite. I just got in the industry, like to be honest, like I don't like again. We weren't so deliberate maybe when we were first all working in the industry. It was like, hey, we're working for Interplay, awesome. Should I fix a printer? Should I go test Should I burn an EEPROM? Should I sweep up? Like, it was just whatever. When I do get to work on games now, I do enjoy it a lot. Right. And maybe in the future, I don't know. I talk about it all the time, but maybe in the future I'll do it again. Because I've been game director at times on projects, taken over strike teams at times. I've done bits and pieces, never for long periods of time. Maybe I will get to make a game again before I march off into the sunset.
You should. I'm going to ask you about that in a bit later, though, because I'm quite interested to hear what that would be. I suppose not to a sadder time, but to a different time with Interplay. And before we start talking about Obsidian and obviously the powerhouse Obsidian is, Interplay closed the label, right? They closed Black Isle, back in the day. And it does seem strange considering the titles that were in development at the time. And I know we touched upon this earlier, but what happened? What was the fallout of that? And how did you feel? Because obviously this is something you've created.
Yeah. I mean, the very first off, I felt bad for the people that got laid off, right? So they closed the label and then they laid off, a bunch of people. And, I was a little frustrated. I forgot when it was, but I think it was, let's say 2002, at least 6 months, if not more, before I left Interplay. And then I took a presentation to sort of it wasn't really the board, but it was all the heads of marketing, the head of marketing, PR, Hervé, who was the president. And I kind of put this presentation together about why don't you sell Black Isle, right? And sell Black Isle with Fallout and the Baldur's Gate license. And of course, you need sign off from Wizards of the Coast at the time. And I said, and I think you can get $20 million for it. And I mean, nowadays it just sounds completely ridiculous that you sold the Baldur's Gate license and Fallout for $20 million and that. But the feedback that came back was, well, we don't think we can get that much, so it's not worth it. And I'm like, okay. So a part of me was frustrated that it was they didn't understand what they had and they didn't want to invest in it. Now, on the flip side, I also understood why, because they felt that there was something unsuccessful happening at Interplay and they needed to try a different route. And that route increasingly was console game. And we mostly did PC games. Now, oddly, we also, through publishing Snowblind Studios' Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, practically the most successful console game that Interplay ever had, right? So it's not that we weren't a console, but we weren't just trumpeting that, right? And that's what led, I think, to Black Isle being sidelined and stuff so I guess that's it. So when the answer to the question is, so it was frustrating because I felt I wished that something could have happened to help Black Isle stay successful.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting now because they've actually bought the company name back, haven't they? Black Isle. How do you feel about that?
It's been so long now. I mean, it's we're coming up on more than 18 years. And the only thing is, to be honest, the only frustration there is I always wanted Black Isle Studio to be the name of my own studio because the Black Isle is the ancestral home of the Urquharts, right? So that's kind of where that came from, the Black Isle. Yeah. And so that's the only thing. I mean, it's unless I buy it from them just so I can have it, right? It's never something I'll be able to use ever again, right? And so I don't know. So it's theirs. If they can be successful with it, awesome. It would be great to see if they could do something with it.
Yeah, 100%. I know it's not the same, but I get that. If you want to when you're creating a username for Steam or any kind of PSN or Xbox Live, all the good ones are gone. And at least yours it needs to have a bond with what you want. Obviously yours is a far deeper bond. And I did actually read that somewhere, the Black Hole. But then obviously that makes sense why you called Obsidian, right? It's there. It's the same. It's the same meaning, but it's
the same kind of thing. Yeah. So, and we tried to keep that kind of thing. At one point, we created a kind of a sister company to Obsidian, and not for any nefarious reasons or anything, but we just created a sister company, and it was called Dark Rock Industry Limited, which of course the acronym is DRILL, which we thought was funny. So I don't know. Sometimes we can have fun with things like that, but we kind of kept the Dark Rock, Obsidian, I don't know, thing going.
Yeah. How did that come about? Because Obsidian's classed as the successor to Black Isle, that's a lot of people consider it the successor. Tell us about the founding of Obsidian, though.
Well, yeah. So I left Interplay Black Isle. I'm gonna call April-ish, somewhere on there, 2003. I have to really go back. I should. Sometimes you wish, God, I should have really written some of this stuff down. So 18 years later, I can answer a question. And
I'm sorry. Sorry.
So I left in April, and Chris Parker, Darren Monahan, Chris Avalone, Chris Jones left, soon after, and then a couple more people, Aaron Myers and Dan Spitzley, kind of followed us at that point. And we just were like, let's do it, right? We're still young enough. Some of us had kids or kids on the way and mortgages, and it felt like if we didn't do it now, we weren't going to do it. So we did it. I mean, maybe it was arrogant, but we felt like we had a pretty good notoriety. We both did external development and internal development, and so that's a good story. It means you understand the publishing side and the development side, and so that could make publishers more, want to work with you. And so we just started talking to different people. Like we almost immediately started talking to Atari about Neverwinter Nights 2. And this was like in early 2003. We were talking to LucasArts about using the Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance engine to do a sort of a Star Wars action RPG, which we would have made. That would have been cool. With a little R2-D2 companion, I think was one of the ideas. And, we pitched a lot of different stuff, and our break really came from when ultimately, it's funny how all these different decisions across the universe happen, right? So Ray and Greg at BioWare, because they wanted to build BioWare into its own sort of world creator, IP creator, was they wanted to go in essence make Mass Effect and not Knights Republic 2. And LucasArts wanted to follow up as quickly as possible on the success of Knights Republic 1. And so I got a call, right? We already really knew the engine. I mean, the engine, because the Infinity engine that made the, BG1, BG2, Icewind Dale, Torment, Icewind Dale 2 was the foundation for both the Neverwinter Nights and Knights Republic engine. And so we kind of already knew the technology. And so we got up and running very quickly. We were off to the races.
That's mad, isn't it? Do you know what's crazy is that was your first title at Obsidian, was Knights of the Old Republic 2. And again, it was a success, right? Huge success. Yeah, geez. I've completed that as well. I think I've completed most of your game, weirdly. I haven't completed many games either. But even Dark Alliance, it's so mad because it was 20 years ago, more than that. But 25 years ago. Dark Alliance on the PS2.
PS2, it was eventually Xbox and GameCube, but quite a ways after the PS2 version.
Again, but it's mad that I'm surprised no one went for the action RPG Star Wars game though, because it does feel like Jedi, Star Wars universe action RPG. That would work, right? There's parts of these ideas end up in other games as well, though. I guess with yourself though, you've actually worked on or been a major influence in a lot of RPGs, big RPGs. Do you have a favorite project?
I'm proud of a number of ones, right? So I'm proud of Baldur's Gate 1 because I made that happen. My boss at the time actually wanted me to turn the game down. And I very rarely did this, but then I kind of went out into Interplay and found support from another VP and explained to her the opportunity, showed her what had us, told her how we could use it. And then I had a relationship with Brian Fargo at the time, but not we weren't. This was before I was even running Black Isle. And she called Brian up. He looked at it and just looked at both of us and said, "Sign it," right? And so I'm very proud of that. I am proud of the fact that for Torment, I knew to kind of step back and let the team do what they do and make that game. It would never have been a game that I would have made, necessarily at the time in my career. I let them do what they wanted to do. Icewind Dale is, a game where I look at and go, it sounds so weird, but we were looking for a game we were working on Fallout 3 actually, and it wasn't going well, and Interplay was starting to have some financial issues, and so we needed some other product. And I just kind of came up with this, let's do a dungeon crawl using the Baldur's Gate engine, and then someone said, let's do it in Icewind Dale, right? And it would have been very easy for people to go, oh, this is just some weird ass Baldur's Gate spin-off. It's not even a real work, but everyone bought into what we were saying, and the game reinforced that. And so I'm super proud that we did that. KOTOR, because it feels a distinct game in comparison to KOTOR 1, but it's not different. It's not oh, this is some weird offshoot somewhere else. So it's a great compliment.
And that's incredibly difficult to do because completely different dev team. They do actually feel like they're created by the same team,
Mhm.
but there's enough differences to obviously show like innovation that it is actually a sequel. You don't often see that being achieved to that level of success.
So I think what happens is, as creative people, like can be very focused on our own creativity, and we need to be, because you have to create something from nothing, right? And so that takes a certain amount of ego, belief in your abilities, or just not worrying about like the ramifications of things. And I think sometimes when teams, and we've done this as well, you apply that to like the continuation of something, you kind of get into this mode of like less focused on like how do we continue it and more focused on what can we change. And so I think a lot of teams get, but I think ultimately we've done a great job. And maybe this goes back to, not circling way back to earlier what we were talking about, but we came up in this period of time when we all loved living in the D&D world. We loved living in that world. We didn't, at least for me, myself, I didn't feel like I needed to go create another D&D. I just wanted to make games within that world. And so when we were given something like South Park or Fallout New Vegas or Star Wars, it wasn't about saying we're going to make our version of this. It was about creating a chapter within that IP. Because it's about like people play a game in a property like that because they want to be in that property. They're not there to experience our cool new ideas. There should be some cool new ideas that are subtly in there about like that build upon the IP or the gameplay or things like that. But it shouldn't be like, well, I know that Star Wars is a lot about Jedi and spaceships, but we're going to make it purely about trading Wampa bits, right? A trading sim, right? And I'm like, whoa, what's, so I don't, that's a stupid example. But so I guess that's probably why I feel like we were successful, when we played in those other worlds.
Yeah, I think it's hard to do, right? Because I think you just said, like that creativity, you want to be like, right, I've got this IP, like I've got this license, and I want to show the world like my version. I think my version is probably the best version. No one goes out to create something bad. They want to create something good.
Right.
And it's like,
yes,
and I think that's the hard thing.
100%. Everyone's intentions are in the right place.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's the execution which can be, but yeah, like, Knights of the Old Republic 2, there was a big focus on the lightsaber, rebuilding your lightsaber. And that was fantastic because in the first one, you were becoming a Jedi or a Sith. And it's like, now this is your journey. But it wasn't just that, but it was interesting that, like you said, like he could just be an episode. If it was a show, it could have been an episode within a show. Just that bit of building your lightsaber. And Stick of Truth, South Park Stick of Truth. Again, that could have been that could be multiple episodes.
And that's like, so a lot of times particularly with Matt and Trey, particularly with Trey, because Trey's a huge gamer, over a long period of time, we're trying to get to the best way of talking about the game. And, ultimately how we all ended up started talking about it was just, we called it a season of the show, right? So, because an episode of the show is focused on a singular thing, right? Now, the game still has to have an ultimate singular point. We need to move back from this idea of like being so focused on the one joke, because that has to play out now over 15 to 20 hours, right? And so like it still needs to be made up of multiple smaller jokes that build to the more meta joke, right? And I think was also hard for Trey was he's used to like, okay, he wakes up and we actually watch this on, I think it's 6 Days to Air or something on the Netflix special about them, right? I don't know if it's on Netflix anymore, but it was. Let's say Trey sleeps all Thursday, wakes up Friday morning, and kind of figures out, they have a loose idea of what the show is going to be, but then he figures out, okay, what's the topical thing that I want to talk about that we're then going to have on the air Wednesday, right? So like just the submission process of our game is 6 weeks. So we will have finished all the jokes and then people are not going to play it for 6 weeks. So it is a very different structure, right? So it's interesting, like within that, how to make it feel like South Park, how it feel like a season, and then recognize it has to be South Park, but different from how South Park normally gets made.
Talking of, I was just thinking about, obviously you mentioned Baldur's Gate, like it's, one of the key moments in your career, and obviously, favorite projects because of that, because obviously you made it happen. And that was like at its infancy, at its inception. And now you've got Baldur's Gate 3, obviously being developed by Larian. Have you had a chance to play it? Have you followed the news on it?
And so I played it a little bit. feel like I have to apologize to Larian that I have not actually put more time into it. I mean, no, I'm super happy for them. I mean, they've been so successful. The Divinity games are, incredible. How Sven's like focused the company and how he's like embraced early access, and he did it incredibly well. Me and him were talking. We actually had not met until E3 of 2019, I think. And, we'd exchanged some emails and Skype messages and stuff like that. We finally sat down and, and he was fairly critical. He was basically, when I say fairly critical, like I need to put grammar in there. He was critical in a fair way about like how we handled like the launch of Eternity 2 and stuff like that, because Eternity 2 is an amazing game, and I feel like we could have done better there. Anyways, that's not Baldur's Gate 3. But Baldur's Gate 3 is interesting just because we had started working on it at Interplay, and we had gotten fairly far, and Interplay lost the license, and so we had to change, and that's when it then became Baldur's Gate 3, then became in essence Fallout 3. Van Buren, I think it's called Van Buren, and that was about I'd left when that. No, I can't remember. We're just starting it up or something like that. And Josh Sawyer had worked on both. And then we started working on Baldur's Gate 3 2010-ish. And we've had other conversations with publishers and stuff like that. So in some ways I'm envious. This is a brand that I put a lot of my own self into, and do not take that as even though I put a lot of energy into it, I'm not the creative person that that BioWare gets all the credit for what Baldur's Gate is. I picked the name. Let's I made it happen, and I picked the name. I did more than that, but those are let's just really distill it down. That if in the annals of Wikipedia, that's really all that should be listed for what I did. So no, I like I said, I'm envious. So I am really looking forward to actually assigning myself some time to actually sit down and get into it.
It happens with everything, right? You do something, and then so you have your kids, and then they do something that you can no longer do. And I'm not saying that's exactly the same. It's probably a terrible analogy, but you experience it in a different way, I guess. Yeah. And you're going to experience it in a different way. And yeah, you just touched on actually Pillars of Eternity, like 1 and 2. And am I correct in believing there's going to be a first-person RPG, but in the Pillars world, in the Pillars universe? Is that correct?
Yes. So it was E3 of 2020, we announced Avowed. And so Avowed is a first-person RPG within the Pillars universe.
I like isometric RPGs. I think there's less and less of them, but I think they have a character. How do isometric RPGs evolve now? Because from a gameplay and a feature perspective, it feels like in some ways they've plateaued. And many of the improvements are coming from the narration and audio-visual enhancements.
I don't know. I think it's maybe it's like any genre that you have to kind of what's the point of the genre? So, and actually you brought it up before, which is real time with pause, right? And versus turn-based, right? And ultimately with the Eternity games, they're both. So the thing is to say with the isometric, what's the point of these games and who are they for? Right. Yeah. And so I think a lot, what we talked a lot about is if we were moving forward, would we just go turn-based at this point? Is that really the better thing for this? And also the thing is to ask the question of what can you accomplish in a genre or expression of a genre that you can't accomplish in another expression? So if all an isometric RPG is just a cheaper way of making a bigger RPG, then that's probably not, because players don't care. They don't care that you spend 100 million or 5 million. It doesn't, it doesn't matter, right? It's well, that's cool. That's all you get for that, right? And
it's such a sad truth.
And so, as it should be. Actually, it should be that way because it doesn't matter. It's their $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, whatever. It doesn't matter if we spent 5 or 100. So I think that's maybe the way to look at it is taking something like the isometric RPG forward is what makes it special, what gives it purpose, and not kind of focus on this. Oh, it's just, like I said, it's just a cheaper way. It can't just be that. It cannot just be we're making it because we can do it cheaper than this, right? Because then, players can see through that.
There are a lot of turn-based games outside of the RPG genre.
Yeah.
And so for me, and sometimes they're limited by their rule set or the type of genre they are to be turn-based. And I know turn-based is becoming increasingly popular, has done for quite a while now with card games and even tactical RPGs and things like this. And XCOM is a great example of turn-based being done incredibly well. Civilization games. There are so many turn-based games. And I think that's probably why real-time RPGs from an isometric perspective, or even like first-person perspective, I think there are just it's an opportunity, I guess.
Yeah,
but I think
totally
it's an
agree. So,
opportunity
don't like when I like me personally, right? Like I really do like real time with pause, but there also has to be a balance because there's this push. So you have to think again. It's like thinking about who is this game for. So there are people who enjoy the incredible, like if there's an incredible complex game system, people can really enjoy that. I really enjoy systems like that. If you apply an incredibly complex game system to a real time with pause, how much can you really be? Are you really just paying turn? You're pressing the space bar so much to understand exactly what's going on, and you have to do it in almost every single fight. Then that is that turn based. You know where I actually went back and I did this. I can't remember. Probably about 3 years ago. I went back and I played Icewind Dale 2, and I need to go back again and play some of the Infinity Engine because those felt different. Because not that D&D is simple, it has lots of complexity in options, but not necessarily moment-to-moment complexity. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, you are having to make certain, you have to understand certain things about the weapon I'm using and the enemy, but it's a little bit more rock, paper, scissors than like, oh, well, but it has these 7 defenses and this has 6 different things it can do. Like, and you're like, oh my God. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering for real time with pause to continue also is to say, okay, anybody who's doing it would have to focus on a system that provides lots of options.
Yeah, I do think it's a balance, isn't it? It's basically exactly what you're saying as well, is in terms of there's also this payoff of time, right? Like you have a budget, right? So obviously in my head, it's just like a sandbox. I have an infinite budget and you're just thinking, right, I want an incredibly complex system. I want the RPG to be real time, but to have all the benefits of turn-based. And I think I'm just dreaming, basically. At this point.
I think sometimes you can simplify. I mean, simplify is the wrong way of saying it. I think is, but a lot of it is like, what are we trying to do in any game that we make? Is we're trying to make it fun and you as a player to feel successful, right? So because we need to challenge you, and then you need to feel successful at those challenges. Now, some people. Right. I think it was on Steam the other day, and there was like levels of difficulty, like, you know, story, easy, like they were trying to rate a game, easy, blah, 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 hard, super hard, Demon Souls. Like that was really is the hardest, like, or frustration level. I forgot. Maybe that's what I've not thrown a lot of controllers in my life, but playing Demon Souls the first time, man, I threw a controller. I think that's the thing is like looking at those and just going, okay, but like backing up and go for, I don't want to say the average person because that gets into weird conversations, but like for most of us playing this game, and we're of a type of player like this, we like this level of number complexity, and we like this many of options on our characters, and we want this many people in our party, and these are kind of good numbers, like 4 to 6 people in the party, and 3 to 5 stats, and 200 perks to choose from. And then once you get into the world, like feeling like making sure the player feels like they can be successful with, like they're going to get challenged and not always going to succeed every single time, but you have this eventual march of success, right? And just how do we make sure that happens? And then so I guess that's, I don't know, maybe that's where I kind of bring it back to when thinking about like, how do you move something forward like a real time with pause game?
Incremental achievements within a game. So you like you just said, like you do have these moments of success, but you have to make them challenging enough that it feels like a challenge, so you do feel rewarded, but actually they've got to be easy enough so you can achieve them. Last week, I had on Warren Spector, who created Deus Ex, and he said like his thing with how he designs and how he approaches like game creation is, well, there's two. One is cause consequence recovery in terms of like the difficulty level and those incremental successes, how you're supposed to eventually get there. But the other part is, if you're not very good at shooting, then you can do stealth. If you're not very good at stealth, then you can hack and so on. So he very much builds worlds like that. However, we were talking about classes, right? Because I said, well, it's great that you can do like stealth and you can decide to shoot your way through or stealth your way through. But actually, that decision is often taken out of like the player's hands almost immediately. You make that decision. And I love classes. I love reading about classes. I love how varied they are. And I love, if you're playing a multiplayer game, you feel it. D&D, for example, obviously, you're like the wizard, right? Or you're the priest, and you have a responsibility that no one else can match. And whenever you achieve something, no one else in the group can achieve it, and you get great success, and it's repeated in games. However, it does mean games are created, and often you're deciding how you're going to play it straight away. What are your thoughts on classes?
It has to do with the game. I know hundreds of people have said this before, but the best way to look at it is that when you have a game like Baldur's Gate that has a party, and you have a game like Fallout New Vegas, which is, you can have companions, but it's basically just you. The 6 party members that make up the party in Baldur's Gate all create one character that has all these abilities. And then you have the same thing over here, because still, even with your party of 6, you are making some decisions about how you want to emphasize, whether it's damage versus tanks versus healing versus this, because you're still choosing which classes and what number of each class you're going to have in that party. And then, but over here, any game where you're playing in like Skyrim or Fallout New Vegas, even games in some with like companions with Outer Worlds and Mass Effect, your character is a fighter, magic user, thief, cleric. Yeah. Like they all are. Right, that's what they are, and they just have different elements. So basically what it is we just take the classes and we put them all in and make the player choose how much they want to invest in each of those classes within the character itself. And then people can then choose to be who they want to be, and that's like how the perk systems work, right? So like if you go and you're looking back at like the original Fallouts, when Fallout 1, which I always thought it was entertaining that Fallout 1, we called them perks, and then D&D 3rd edition, they were called perks. Anyway, so that's actually, so then when you create this tree of perks that are dependent upon one each other, you then allow the player, like people can then go, well, I want to be a sharpshooter, I want to be a sniper, right? And so they're still going to be able to heal, right, to a certain level, but then they can like keep on going into this route, so then they can play this style of character. Like another way to look at it is like, healing potions in D&D are pretty expensive because you do have a cleric, right? Stim packs are everywhere in Fallout. So, you can still buy them, but you find them. I don't know. That's the balance, I guess. I guess so. I don't know if I'd really answered the question of what it should be, but I think ultimately it really is. It's going to be based upon the expression of the game you are making. And do you want the player to be a lone wolf? When there has to be a lone wolf, then they need the abilities to survive, which means having some elements of those things. And I think also the thing is, I always want us to be careful of it is, so it's rewarding when you choose hey, I'm going to put some extra points into lock picking, right? So now I go into this thing and now I can open all the locks. Where if I didn't, I go into this thing and I can't open all the locks. There's a line somewhere for players where they're like, F you, game designer, because you basically said I have to put them on locks or I have to put it on lock picking because half the chests in this dungeon are beyond my ability, right? So then that's where you have to be careful of how class-ish you go within the character.
I think it's so tough, isn't it? When everything becomes the same, then you no longer. And I know MMOs really struggle with this because their big feature is often new classes, right? WoW does it, like Final Fantasy, and it's obviously they're great games. But the issue is how many ways can you do damage? Yeah, it's just interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating to watch and experience. But I don't like homogenization. I like, if I can't open a lock in a game, I'm I love that because I'm God, someone else is going to be able to open that lock, and they're going to have a completely different. A leprechaun could jump out and attack them, and they get teleported to a world full of leprechauns. I don't know, but it's they're going to have a completely different experience to what I am just because of that decision. You have to have meaningful decisions. They've got to be meaningful, but they can't be absolute in the sense of, you're locked off from massive parts of the game.
Because that's the thing of you have to be super careful. I think one of the things we all try to do is to say when a player makes a decision, no matter what it is, it needs to be rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's that weird because a lot of people's well, I chose to, I chose to shoot grandma rather than help her across the street. We then need to make that rewarding. Then you got to take all her crap, right? She has to spend $100,000 on her. So I'm using a bad example, right? But again, it's okay, then you're known as the grandma killer. And so when you show up in the bar, he goes, oh, dude, you kill grandmas. Here's a beer. I don't want anything to do with you. Again, it's this, oh, so I got notoriety, which is a reward, right? So so you try to always make sure that whatever you're doing is a reward, and reward can, the word can get caught up in this, well, it's money or an item or a thing like that. No, it can be the world, you're rewarded by the world does something based upon the choices that you make. What we've tried in, more recently is it's not just like a one number that tracks your karma or your reputation or things like that. It's like, well, you have bad reputation, you have good reputation, and they're tracked separately. So we can kind of understand that about how you're acting within the world.
I think that's much better. I think that's what you want. You need greater interaction between the player and the world rather than just through the character. And I think a lot of that comes down to what your morality becomes, because they're your decisions, but your character's having to deal with it. Okay, last couple of questions, and then I will let you go. But obviously, during this, during the last hour, we've obviously spoken a lot about all these massive titles, all of them, and you're incredibly successful and had a huge influence over video games as a whole. What would you attribute your success to?
That's an interesting question. I think it's a number of things. It sounds lame to say, but early on in my career, I would say luck in right place, right time. Oddly, just like how, I happened to grow up in Orange County where Interplay was here. And I luckily had a friend who was in a D&D game with someone who worked at Interplay that got him a job, and then he got me a job, right? So that's just the universe, right? I think after that, and maybe it's a platitude, but I would say I worked hard. I really did, between 1996. And this is not I know there's a lot of conversation about crunch time in our industry and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm not trying to make a comment about this is right or wrong. I'm just going to say what I did, which is I worked 6-7 days a week from 1996 to 2001 and 2000. Yeah, the end of 2000 when BG2 shipped. I didn't take a whole lot of days off, but I was enjoying it, and I could do it because I was in my 20s and I was in the right place to do it. And again, this is not to say that that's how the industry should be or anything like that. It just, that's what it was. And I worked hard, right? I worked hard within an environment that my work had impact, right? And I think that was what made it where I wasn't necessarily burnt out. I was tired at times, of course, and I did obviously there was times I would take a few days off and things like that, but that was what led to my success, was I was able to be impactful in an organization that let me be impactful. The last couple of things that has really helped me is I am interested in how games are made. So I'm not just interested in hey, it would be cool if we made a game about a minotaur that carries around, I don't know, a chainsaw, but it's more of well, how can we do that? How can we get the most gameplay hours to this person? What tools do we need? And how do we organize the team? And how, to me, it's a big puzzle. And so I think that success in the game industry, particularly at the senior levels, has to be about, you have to be inquisitive. You have to be wanting to understand, and you want to have to do better every time. And that would be the last thing I would say is I talk about this sometimes, is I'm going to make a bunch of mistakes today, a lot of them, right? And I don't mean this to be sort of, I don't know, Tony Robbins or new agey or anything like that, but next morning I have to not worry about it anymore. Can't dwell on it, because if you dwell, I can't change the past. I can only change the future. Right. And so I think by trying, and I'm not always successful at this, but I think that mindset of in game development is super helpful, in that you're just okay, let's put all that behind. Yes, we totally screwed up. We did that wrong. This is thing. We lost that license, or that person quit, or this engine's not working out, or those are all true. And we can sit here and talk about them for the next 8 hours about woe is us, or what we could do is say, what do we do as of this minute? And we applied that. We went through hard times at Obsidian, and we had layoffs, and that was how we applied it. Was if something bad happened, we just got together and said, okay, what are we going to do about it? And then we came up with a plan, and then we got in front of everybody and told everybody, this is the bad thing that happened, and this is what we're going to do about it. And then we just marched forward, right? And so that's what it is. It's just a constant moving forward and not dwelling on the past. And I think, for me personally, and as and our Obsidian and Black Isle as organizations, I think that's what led to the longevity.
I think it's a great answer. It's interesting as well, isn't it? Just this constantly moving forwards, constantly working on. And I do like that it is the early element of your success anyway is very much like luck. You're I was lucky, it's the right time, right place, but actually seizing the opportunity by being, I'm just going to apply myself because I enjoy this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to work for 5 years, and for 5 years I'm going to work 6-7 days, but actually it's because I want to achieve something. And I think perseverance, I think, can go an incredibly long way. I always try and tell my son, like passion, enthusiasm, and a willing to want to achieve something will often go a lot further than just skill. It's not a straightforward answer, but it's like it's an art, because there's always different reasons for success. But I like that it's just like, you've got to work hard. You might have to have a bit of luck, but and you can see it.
Constantly educate yourself. I mean, I'm not as good as I used to be, but I read business books. I talk to people in the industry, and the idea is to keep on learning. I mean, that's what's amazing about our industry is like we get to keep on pushing forward and staying on the bleeding edge of technology sometimes, even when it's super frustrating. But a lot of it is just continually learning. So, and the one thing I was gonna back up a teeny bit because and just to speak to like when I said, hey, I worked all these hours. I think it's important to say, like, I know I kind of already caveated it, but I just say it just for everybody. Particularly at Obsidian, we've had very few points in time where we ask people to work extra, and it was for short periods of time. It is not a part of our culture. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in people having to work 80 hours a week for months on end. And so it's not we don't use it as a management technique. We don't build our schedules around it. We've really not done it ever since we even started Obsidian. We're much more open about talking about it over the last 8-10 years of like being very blunt and saying, look, we don't do this. But I would say that's something developers need to be super careful about. There will always be crunch because we're creative and we're trying to get stuff done. That's not me promoting it. It's acknowledging it. And our job as people who run studios and our managers is to constantly work against it. is probably the best way to say it.
So I guess like the last thing I really want to know is like you touched upon this earlier, like going back into game design at some point, like maybe doing either what's next for you, or if you're gonna make something, is there a particular license you'd like to work with? What is it?
So I think about it a lot. I mean, for me, it's an RPG, right? Obviously, it's dumb to say, but it's because for me, it's about putting people in worlds, right, and then letting them become part of this world. Like, so whatever, I mean, that's my main thing. I mean, it applies to all the games, even whatever I make that I would, do is that. And the things that interest me is like I really enjoy like the Lucifer TV show on Netflix. I love Shadowrun. There's this book series, and I can't remember the author this second, but it's called The Night Side. And it's kind of like a flavor of, again, of like a little bit like Lucifer and, and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think if I were to do something, it's sort of something in that kind of near future. That's what it is. That's the stuff I've liked. I mean, now when I was playing RPGs and as a teenager, I loved Twilight 2000, but I don't know that resonates, and most people probably don't even know what it is. Ultimately, what I would say there is like, I want to focus on the world. What is this kind of world? How's it put together? And kind of go from there. Probably have elements of that stuff, would be my guess.
Okay, great. That's brilliant. I mean, no idea what's going to happen, but Feargus, it's been an honor. It's been an incredible pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. No, it's been awesome to talk.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Just a quick note: the opinions obviously voiced today are Feargus's and my own. They do not represent the companies that we work for. And if you want to reach out to us, you can at thegamedevshow@ptw.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Game over.